Shall I answer? Hi. If I speak, will I be Oh, I am. No, sorry. Right.
Toby's having some Wi-Fi issues.
Right.
So can we put someone else first?
Sure.
And we'll go after them?
Okay. I'll announce that at the beginning.
Yes. Whoever's second, if you just...
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to be starting in just one moment. If I could ask you to take your seats. Good afternoon. We're going to begin now, I think. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Toby Simpson, and I'm the director of the Wiener Holocaust Library. It's my pleasure and privilege to be here with you today and to chair the last panel of this extraordinary conference. And of course, the first thing I want to say is a huge thank you to the EHRI and to all of the organizers of this fantastic program, which has been so thought-provoking and engaging. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to the panels. So, session 10, I've been instructed very strictly that this is going to be rigidly and strictly timed. So each speaker will have 10 minutes. And I do have a slight change to the program. We were going to begin with Dov Foreman, who is going to be joining us by Zoom, but we are just, oh, he is here. Hello, Dov. But as you can see on the screen, his internet connection is currently unstable. So, Dov, while you are hopefully stabilizing your internet connection, I've had the suggestion that you might speak second. Do you think, I don't know if we can hear you. Perhaps I can test whether we can hear you, Dov.
If we could go second, that would be good. I'm trying to find a new location. Sorry.
Excellent. Right. Well, no problem. You can go second. And if it's okay with Kate, okay, so I'll just introduce you in just 1 second. Okay, so just to say a couple of words to begin with, this panel is entitled Thinking Beyond the Era of the User, Editing, Remixing, and Reusing Testimony in the Digital Age, which I just want to unpack a tiny bit because it's not the most straightforward title for a panel. So the era of the user. I think it's worth saying that the era of the user is a concept that historians have been talking about recently in relation to the Holocaust, and it's about a lot of what we've been discussing. What happens when the previous era, which not everyone will necessarily be aware, the era of the witness. What happens when there are no longer witnesses with us? What happens when we move on to a new era? This is one of the challenges that we've all been confronting in this conference. And the concept of the era of the user is quite a different one. And something that actually I've experienced at the library. Speaking as someone who recently has just made their first reel, it's the way in which the platforms that we use to share information shape how we respond to that information. And in some ways, that gives the user of testimonies a huge amount of power to shape the ways that testimonies are understood, because people can choose their platforms. The user, in some ways, is in charge. And so every organization, like the Wiener Holocaust Library, that has the responsibility to work, the privilege to work with extraordinary Holocaust testimonies, also has to think carefully about the platforms that we use and that we develop, which we're co-developing often with other organizations. So, many would argue we're now in the era of the user, where the user is in charge. What does that mean for us? What does it mean perhaps when we move through that to a whole other era? It's challenging for all of us to think about these things. And social media is, of course, the front line of this debate. And especially when we're dealing with the increased threat of Holocaust distortion and denial, this is really something that is not just a theoretical problem. It's something that in some ways threatens and should concern us all, as we heard in especially the presentations at the outset from Lord Pickles and others. So, an important question for us to finish on: where are we now? How are users, especially young users, shaping the way Holocaust testimony is understood and will be understood in the future? We've got a fantastic panel of contributors, and the first of them to speak to us today will be Dr. Kate Marrison, postdoctoral fellow at the Sussex Weidenfeld Institute of German Jewish Studies at the University of Sussex. Dr. Marrison.
slides to make sure I don't mess up the digital when I'm talking about the digital. Okay, so thank you very much to the EHRI for putting on such a fantastic event over the last 2 days, especially in such a prestigious building. I feel really honoured to have been invited to talk on this panel, and I recognise that I have a very, very tight time frame and everyone's tired and it's the end of the day. So I'm going to take the short time that I have today to talk to you about a project we are currently running at the University of Sussex called Participatory Workshops, Co-Designing Standards for Digital Intervention in Holocaust Memory and Education. I'll share a little bit about how the project got started, our methodology, and where we hope we can take the project moving forward. So similarly to James yesterday, I'm going to start off this presentation with a disclaimer that this is actually a project that is not just my own, but also my colleague, Dr. Victoria Grace Walden. She was meant to be here today to co-present, and she sends her apologies that she can't be here with us. She's also said that her email is open to any of your queries and follow-up questions, and I will give those contact details at the end. Okay, so between spring 2020 and 2021, the Digital Holocaust Memory Platform organised a series of public online events which brought together Holocaust academics, heritage and educational professionals, as well as practitioners and game designers to discuss the landscape of digital Holocaust memory. Throughout the series, it became apparent that Holocaust heritage and educational organisations would benefit from further engagement with an interdisciplinary range of academics and creative professionals working within digital media, and vice versa. Those working in media industries could also benefit from the expertise of Holocaust specialists, and academics would benefit from a better understanding of the practicalities and technicalities of digital creative processes and artifacts. The purpose of this workshop series then is to bring together experts from the Holocaust heritage and education fields, digital creative and technical sectors, and an interdisciplinary range of academics to co-design standards for digital interventions in Holocaust memory and education. These reports will be available as a free open access resource via the Digital Holocaust Memory Platform and via portals that our projects are working with, and some of our partners are on the screen there. So divided into 6 streams, we worked with different international partners to explore the themes of machine learning and AI, digitizing material evidence, digital recording, recirculating and remixing of testimony, Holocaust memory and education on social media, virtual Holocaust memoryscapes, and finally, gaming and play in genocide memory and education. To date, the project has published 4 out of 6 of these recommendation reports and has worked with more than 80 individuals from universities, tech and creative industries, Holocaust organisations, as well as the wider heritage GLAM sector. So to be sure, that's galleries, archives, libraries, archives and museums. It's important for us to stress the point that these documents are not meant to be taken as hard principles or instructions, and they certainly do not claim to be the final word on these topics, but rather mark the beginning of a process and a much longer conversation. For the purposes of this forum, I'm going to very briefly introduce the report on digital recording, recirculating and remixing of testimony, which we worked on with the Centre for Life History and Life Writing Research at the University of Sussex, as well as several colleagues, too many to name now, that are currently sitting in this room. As this project then is fundamentally about co-creation and disrupting barriers and boundaries between sectors and disciplines, those exact tensions between practice and theory, which Professor Sarah Jones has highlighted for us yesterday, we needed to carefully consider our methodology to ensure everyone who contributed to the report was integrally included from the outset. With this in mind, we ask all participants to introduce themselves and complete a pre-workshop task on Padlet, which asks them to respond to a series of questions regarding the theme of the particular workshop and to identify 3 to 4 discussion points they would like to prioritise during the workshop themselves. The word cloud on screen compiles some of the key points that were raised upon asking the participants to identify what they thought were the most immediate, practical and ethical questions surrounding recording, recirculating and remixing testimonies. We'll all remember those 3 Rs if I keep saying them. They were also asked to list what they considered to be the biggest affordances and risks of using digital testimony as we prepare to enter the post-survivor age. Naturally, then, many of the issues raised have been discussed over the past 2 days around ethics, curation and consent, as well as safeguarding against denial and distortion. Crucially, however, those working within the archives themselves underscored the importance of thinking ahead in terms of future-proofing collections, not just in terms of the digital formats and technological maintenance, but also practically in terms of long-term financial support for projects and staff. Similarly, many of the affordances have been highlighted throughout this conference, including enhanced access, visibility, and searchability, as well as the potential to hone in on the art of listening, which has also been discussed by Professor Tony Kushner. These responses on the Padlet are then categorized into themes and form the topic prompts in the workshop themselves, which are divided into 2 sessions. In the first session, following a brief overview of current literature, participants are broken into smaller breakout groups according to their expertise. Following this, we repeat the process, but this time mixing the groups to generate further discussion, sometimes disagreement, across different disciplines and practices. Participants are then given 1 week reflection time while Victoria and I collate the minutes of the sessions into the first draft of the report, which we share for a review and feedback within a 7-day time period. The second workshop takes place 2 weeks after the first and invites colleagues to collaborate and make live edits to a shared Google document, which always proves to be a really interesting part of the process as we end up tearing it up completely, rebuilding it, and rewriting the recommendations, which I'll come back to in a moment. In the final phase, the report is edited and shared with colleagues for approval before publication. So this particular published report is broken into 5 sections, and while I don't have time to go into detail about each of them, I'll delve a little deeper into some of our dialogue of the notion of the user, as it spans across all of these, and it's particularly pertinent to the theme and title of this panel. So, as we've already heard, we continue to hear that we're moving from the era of the witness to the era of the user in the context of digital Holocaust memory. While we can think about the shift as passing control, we must also think critically about the framing of the experience and the user's ability to navigate the testimony via a digital platform and device. In other words, it was felt important to acknowledge the interface, the technology, the digital logics of the experience. They're all entangled in this notion of user agency, and in some cases might even preserve a form of survivor agency. Just throwing that out there to be provocative. Beyond this binary of testimony and user, we might also define the current moment as the era of the platform. As media scholars like Mark Ondrejevic remind us, there are invisible forms of participation we engage in when we contribute data that is published and disseminated by digital platforms, commercial and non-commercial. We must also carefully consider the agency of the platform and organization who create and maintain them, as well as the community of users they attract. Thus, we should be careful of suggesting then that the agency of the witnesses is simply replaced by that of the users in the so-called digital age. It might be more accurate to say that their voices come into relation with others, with corporations as well as users, corporate aims and ambitions, and other technological logics when they circulate in digital spaces. Okay. Well, our conversation inevitably raised more questions than answers in this area. In the spirit of Alex's opening panel this morning, we shouldn't shy away from exploring the unique affordances and possibilities that the digital can offer for potentially new kinds of listening, and by extension, I would suggest digital witnessing. In total, 7 key recommendations emerged from these discussions that I'm now going to cut super short, some of which complement and cross over with the other reports in this series. With the time that I have then, I would like to share some of these recommendations which have become the most urgent action points for the project leads. Primarily, colleagues advocated across all of the reports for the creation of an online hub to maintain contact between institutions and academics where methodologies and contacts can be shared to enable research that takes the institutional context, digital specificities, and media landscape into conversation. Within the hub, there will be a space for sharing of institutional good practice, compiling points from the discussion, with examples collated from a wider survey. It was proposed that subsequent workshops should take place, focusing on sharing practice and experience in different regions, and work together cross-sector to find solutions to potential barriers. Colleagues stipulated that this should include meta-writing, future-proofing consent forms, and approaching a digitalization project from scratch. I'm going to just skip to the last one. The final recommendation I wish to draw attention to is directed at Holocaust organizations directly, as many colleagues stress the importance of avoiding absolute rules about what is and is not appropriate for the reuse of testimonies online. Instead, we recommend the creation of working groups with the institutions themselves that can bring together representatives to meet with testimony givers, next generation involved in creating family films or outputs, professional filmmakers, and general users and researchers. This is my last slide, I promise. Since publication, these 4 reports have been published, and we've just received a Higher Education Innovation Fund to continue our work and begin actioning some of the recommendations I've mentioned. We're particularly excited to be working with the iRights Lab and the Digital Collective Memory Network, which I know many of you are part of, to establish the hub that I've spoken about, and to continue thinking about digital toolkits and digital literacy programs. Of course, this means we're incredibly happy and excited to hear about the establishment of the UK portal and can already see the potential for collaboration moving forward. Ultimately, we hope that the immediate recommendations suggested in these guidelines will help organisations and individuals prioritise the work needed to work effectively with Holocaust testimony in digital spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marrison. Perfect timing there. So, Dov, I don't know if it looks like Dov perhaps isn't quite ready to join us. So, if you're all right to go next, Rachel, would you? Is that okay? So, I'd like to be equally quick as Dr. Marrison was and introduce Dr. Rachel Pistol, who is a digital historian focusing on refugees, immigration, and Second World War internment. She's currently based at the Digital Humanities Department at King's College London, where she's the national coordinator for EHRI UK. Rachel.
Thanks, Toby, and thank you to the AJR for organising this conference, which has been incredibly useful and interesting. Many of you may know me more for my work on refugees and Second World War internment, but I'm here today to talk to you about the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure, which you may or may not know about. So, who are we? We are a group of 25 partner institutions across 17 countries. And this is a project that has been going since 2010 in 3 different phases funded by the European Union. And our partners include some big names that you'd be familiar with, such as the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, Marrison, and the Wiener Holocaust Library. And the goal of what we're doing is really we want to transform the research landscape and make sure that we provide material that is going to help counter Holocaust distortion, make sure that people have access to information that they can use when they are researching the Holocaust to make sure it's as accurate as possible. So if I just show you the journey that we've been on so far, I don't expect you to be able to read everything on the screen, don't worry, but we've gone through 3 phases of funding, and we've been recognised by the European Union as being a very effective tool in terms of combating anti-Semitism. We are named in the EU's strategy for combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. And what we're doing at the moment is we are transitioning from being project-based, where we focus on specific tasks through the different periods of funding, to actually becoming a permanent legal entity in ourselves, where we'll have a central hub which will be based at NIOD in Amsterdam, and then we will have national nodes. So each country will be funded by its national government to have its national nodes. So we are very much working on this at the moment. Toby and I are working very closely on trying to set up the UK Holocaust research infrastructure. And this is where we are at the moment. Now, if you want to understand a little more about EHRI in the time that I don't have to tell you today, we have a handy little pack of cards which give you answers to the most commonly asked questions about this. And if you see my husband, Alan, if you hold your hand up over there, the first 10 people there can have some cards today, but you're always very welcome to email me if you have any questions about it. But seeing as portals have been very much a subject, I will come to that in just a second. But if you're not familiar with EHRI, this is our website, and this is where we post all the news that we're doing, information about what we're doing, because we're very much a digital network and a human network. So on the digital side, we are developing tools and resources that can be used by researchers and other people who are working on Holocaust-related studies as part of their research to present information in different ways, to access information that is held across the world in different archives and bring it all together. We have a very transnational focus. On the other side, we actually have a human network. So we have fellowships where people can apply for short-term access to archives within our partner organisations to go and look at the information in person, and we also run many training events as well. So the best place to always start with EHRI is start with the website, and you'll see that on the right-hand side we have one-click links now to all of the digital resources that we've created that are available, and we're adding to these all of the time. Now, seeing as portals have been very much subject of conversation in this conference, I'd like to introduce you to the EHRI portal, which some of you may have used and some of you may not be aware of. But the EHRI portal, at the moment, we hold over 400,000 archival descriptions from just about 800 institutions from around the world. We're adding to this all of the time, but these are in English. They're also in the languages of the countries from which they come as well. We have descriptions of archival institutions from 60 countries. At the moment, we're just over 2,000 archival institutions, and we also do reports on different countries to highlight what the status is in terms of Holocaust research within that country, which archives are held, and sort of what the progress is. And this is really a portal where we have all of the information about documents that relate to Holocaust and related studies from different archives, so that you can go through and see what information exists. And this is a very powerful tool for assisting people with their research. I'm just going to show you a couple of other things that we have. We have many other digital tools that are available to you, but one of the things we've been creating are these online editions where we take testimony. So, for example, we have the early Holocaust testimony online edition, which is taken from a lot of material from the Wiener Holocaust Library, as well as some other archives as well. And within that, we take topics and we take original documents. You can see the original document there. Then we transcribe them. We text encode them so that you can search by different terms. We translate them. And we also show you some geographic data relating to the documents as well. We have, at the moment, 5 online editions. We just launched one last week, and we're about to launch another one. And these cover lots of different areas, and they can be used as a really good educational resource in order to actually get people familiar with some of the primary source material, but not just from one country, but from many different countries as well. And staying on the theme of oral testimonies, we're organising a number of events, and this week I started in London on a panel looking at oral testimonies, trying to extract some of the data from there in terms of geospatial data. Can we map things? Can we present things? Because we have a very text-based archive, obviously. And what are different ways that we can engage the user? What are different ways that we can communicate this information? And so next month we have a workshop. We're calling it a hackathon because we're bringing together people who have technical skills, and we're bringing them together with using some material from the Fortunoff archive, from the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, and they are going to be actually looking at the best ways that we can use artificial intelligence, we can use digital tools to actually transcribe this material, to translate this material. We have a multilingual group of representatives who are coming to do this and look at actually ways that we can explore taking geospatial data. How can we map this? How can we tell people's stories in another way that is going to reach out to more people so that they will engage with this material? Another tool that I just wanted to show you is just to demonstrate sort of how we are trying to develop as many different things that are useful to the research community globally. We also have a series of digital tool guides, and these are step-by-step instructions on how to take any data that you might have and actually present it in a different way. And these are specifically designed so that even if you are petrified of computers and you've never used one in your life, there are photos to take you through, and some of them are incredibly simple, some of them you have to have a little bit of technical knowledge in order to work with. But again, we are adding to these all the time because we are trying to educate people in what are good ways that you can actually engage with the user with your research. So, as I just come towards the conclusion of my presentation, that's the work that EHRI has been doing, the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure has been doing since 2010. And where are we now? We are now starting the UK Holocaust Research Infrastructure as part of feeding into this transnational network that will be a permanent legal organisation and that will continue the important work that we have been doing for the last 13 years. If you go to either the central EHRI website, or if you go to the EHRI UK website, you'll see we have a short video that should answer any questions in terms of how the effect of what we're doing is reaching people and what we're trying to do, how we're connecting records and connecting people from different countries to work together on central themes such as refugees, the Holocaust, etc. And what are we trying to do? These are our main objectives because we want to represent all the organisations within the UK who work on the Holocaust and refugee studies and related fields. And we are looking to ensure the long-term sustainability of Holocaust research within the UK and beyond. Now, obviously, we are in the process of developing this as we go through, but we are already making great headway in terms of working through with our core partners, and we will eventually grow this further. So really, all I can say is watch this space in terms of what's happening next. But if you've got any questions about EHRI, please feel free to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That was a fascinating presentation. I think, looking at the screen earlier, it looks like Dov has managed to get himself to a new location. So I wonder if, Dov, are you there? This is a bit of an eerie experience. He was for a while. I don't want to lose him altogether, so I don't quite know. Is Dov there? It's slightly spooky. It might be best to move to the third presentation, then we'll try one more time with Dov. So if you're happy to go next, Jaya, I will introduce Jaya Pathak, who is the co-founder and co-executive director at Yet Again, an organisation raising awareness about modern atrocities and challenging their proliferation. Jaya.
Can you guys hear me okay? So thank you, AGR, for hosting this conference. I wish I could have attended most of it, but because of work, I couldn't. And thank you for having me speak. It's a privilege. I don't have a presentation, and I'm going to be trying to touch a few different angles, looking at survivor testimony, as well as the ethics of survivor testimony and how we can use that. So essentially, in order to understand why survivor testimony is so powerful, we're all in agreement that it's because it helps us build a personal connection with what happened during the Holocaust, and it allows us to bridge the gap between the past and the present and also the future, because the Holocaust seems like it was so long ago, but actually in the history of humankind it really wasn't. And that's what the difficulty is with thinking about how we go and enter this transitionary period of where survivors are less able to share their testimony, but also fewer are sharing their testimony now. I heard from my first Holocaust survivor when I was 17. That was 8 years ago. It was with the Holocaust Educational Trust, and I heard from Susan Pollock. And I never forgot that experience, and I think you'll be hard-pressed to find anybody who doesn't remember the first Holocaust survivor they heard from. What was so powerful about that experience, as someone who's not from the Jewish community and who doesn't have a personal connection to the Holocaust, is that hearing about Susan's upbringing and the common things she used to do with her family, which I do with my family, made me realize how close to home everything really is and how history can so easily repeat itself in different ways. And again, that was the benefit of hearing from Susan. And when I left and I went on the Lessons from Auschwitz project, I wanted to learn more. I got more involved with HET, and I had two experiences which were really powerful in showing me the benefit of not only hearing from survivors, but visiting sites of the Holocaust and sites of Jewish life. And I talk about this because I think we often forget that we are in a digital age, but we can look at combining the very human things that we do with social media and with the use of technology. So on March of the Living, as many of you know, you visit sites of the Holocaust and you also visit sites of Jewish life. And I remember we had Marla Trivett on our bus with us, and she went everywhere with us, which was incredible. One place she did not visit were the forests because of how her mother and sister were murdered. So that's the one place she never goes on these trips. And we didn't have Marla with us when we visited the forest. And I remember feeling I found that quite eerie because we were so used to having Marla with us on the trip and explaining sort of her personal story. But what that taught me is it showed me just how powerful the site of the Holocaust was in itself, that it was so evocative and it reminded Marlow of such a terrible tragedy. And that showed me the importance of still visiting places like that. So Rachel Sentry, who was our educator, she read testimony from other victims of the Holocaust who lost family in the forests. And that was a really powerful experience as well, because I didn't have a survivor with us presently in person, but we still heard testimony and we still felt that personal connection to what was going on because we heard about the story. On the other hand, we heard Renée Salt in a barrack in Auschwitz, the very barrack she was imprisoned in, tell us her story. So in that situation, we had a Holocaust survivor with us, and it was equally as powerful. And it made me realize that we don't have to be so fearful of not having Holocaust survivors with us and present with us to share their stories, because both experiences left us with a huge hole, essentially. We felt very empty afterwards, but also very encouraged to go on and to learn more. So I left and I remember thinking, okay, so sites of the Holocaust, I didn't really understand just how powerful they were when I first began my journey with HET. And it wasn't because they're not important, it was just because for so long it was all about survivor testimony, as it should be, because it's so powerful. But I remember leaving that trip thinking, okay, what about for those who can't visit sites of Holocaust history, and what about those who can't hear from survivors? How can we bridge that gap? So on a study visit to Budapest with the Holocaust Educational Trust, we didn't have a survivor with us at all. All we had were the sites of Jewish life, actually, and sites where Hungarian Jewish life was thriving and bustling before the Holocaust. But we did have testimony read to us by Martin, who was our educator. And he also read not just testimony from survivors, but diary entries from victims who died and who were murdered in the Holocaust. And that again taught us just how powerful visiting these sites were. And so the reason I mention this is because I think that we all feel quite apprehensive about thinking about a world where we no longer have Holocaust survivors who are able to share their story. But where we can, we should be trying to encourage the work we're doing in the digital age and the work of the second-generation survivors and third-generation survivors in visiting these sites, because that's how you build that personal connection. And I stress that because as someone, again, who doesn't have that connection, it made a huge mark on me. And I think we need to encourage our educators and our organizations to continue that work and also continue the preservation of these sites. And not just sites of murder and tragedy, but sites where Jewish life once thrived. I think that's incredibly important. And we can encourage other organizations, which I know they're doing already, to share that testimony, to read those stories, to read those diary entries, and we can still touch people in a very personal way and have a good impact, which I think is essentially what we're worried about losing. I think it's also really important to focus on the ethics of sharing Holocaust testimony once survivors are no longer here. And I think the reason that it's increasingly difficult is because Holocaust survivors, again, we're in a very digital age, so when Holocaust survivors record their testimony, often that goes out online, and that information can be taken and it can be edited and remixed, sometimes not in the best way. And I think that's something we have to definitely think about. How are Holocaust survivors' testimony, how is it being used or repurposed, and in any way is it being manipulated and politicized? And it's a very real threat. We see it on social media, and I'm sure Dov's going to talk about social media and the amazing work that he's done. And I'm sure he will at some point also be able to share that with you, that there is that fear of that information being easily accessible by everybody and therefore being used in a way that's not favorable or that politicizes the words of Holocaust survivors. So we definitely need to think about that as well in the digital age. And I remember working with two Holocaust survivors, Dorrit Oliver Wolf and Ruth Barnett, who wanted to raise awareness of other genocides, one being the Uyghur genocide in China. And what myself and Joe, who was also an ambassador with HET, worked really hard to do is ensure that we can support survivors in sharing their testimony and encourage them to feel like they can do that freely while remaining sensitive to the Holocaust and sensitive to avoiding comparisons, which are so easy for people to fall into. We've seen that all over in the news as well, and how easy it is to tap into that and lose track of that on social media. So once survivors are no longer with us, how are we going to ensure that their testimony is protected in that way? And how are we going to make sure that it's not politicized on either end of the spectrum, whether it be by politicians or it be by human rights advocates who use it and try and manipulate it for righteous reasons? So those are two things that I want to throw out there and allow us to think a little bit about, and ensure also that we talk a little bit about interfaith inclusion and how we can encourage people from different backgrounds to get involved in Holocaust education. So I'm not Jewish, I'm practicing Hindu, and in the Hindu community, we're talking more and more about the Holocaust, I was talking about this actually yesterday at the reception with somebody. There is this appetite from people from different faiths and organizations to get involved with Holocaust education. Initially, it's not knowing how to do that, but we can start off, and I think we should be encouraging second and third generation survivors to get involved with us where we can. And I'm happy to signpost people to relevant groups where needed, and seeing how we can encourage that to happen. But I touch on that as well, because we're seeing in an age of social media, again, it's the accessibility to information, and where that can be manipulated and how that can encourage individuals to misunderstand what we're trying to get at when we talk about the Holocaust and how we combat anti-Semitism. So a slightly different angle, but I hope that gives us something to think about, and I hope I offer a slightly different perspective as someone who's not from the Jewish community, but who's been profoundly impacted by the words of Holocaust survivors. Thank you.
It sounds like we haven't managed to make the connection work with Dov, so the realities of digital challenges are making themselves felt in this panel. But I think actually what it means is it's a fantastic opportunity for some in-person, old-fashioned engagement with this topic. So I'm going to use the last 15 minutes to invite questions from the floor. And I especially would love to explore more this question that Jaya, I think, very ably introduced about how, I think actually all of the speakers touched on this, how we positively engage with this social media digital landscape that we find ourselves in a situation where the negative so often spreads much faster on social media. How do we make progress when it comes to the dissemination of reliable information, of testimonies as survivors would have liked them to be heard and understood? That's a really challenging question for all of us. But I would really love to hear some questions from the floor on this topic. A question towards the back there, yes.
Thanks. All really interesting presentations. My question is, I guess, for all of you, not so much things you touched on, but some things you didn't touch on. I mean, you've mentioned, and other people have mentioned, the issue of the danger of information being misused or distorted. But I'd like to ask very explicitly, with digital access, what is the danger of neo-Nazis using records of the Holocaust, not just to distort, but to really try and rebuild movements? And on the one hand, digital access is about openness, but at the same time, what kind of very real restrictions are needed? And are there examples, would you say, of neo-Nazis using digital resources to try and build themselves up politically? Thanks.
I don't know if anyone on the panel, Jaya, would you like to?
Is this, can you guys hear me? Sorry, I keep asking that. So I don't know any examples particularly of neo-Nazis using that information. I think the key thing is it's about manipulation, right? So once that information's out there, and it should be open and free to access for all, what can we do to try and safeguard that information, or how, not necessarily safeguard that information because we can't, but if you have somebody who is manipulating images of the Holocaust or historical facts that have been presented, for example, in newspaper clippings, I've seen on social media, on Twitter, being edited and being photoshopped to be misrepresenting facts and figures and statistics. That's absolutely terrifying. We can't stop somebody doing that once that information's out there, but we can try and essentially put out more information or put out sort of a stronger sense online with a social media presence that combats that. And that's just the disadvantage to using social media is once it's out there, but we need to try and, I think, cover our base a little bit more online. And we already have organizations who are doing that. I can't think of examples of neo-Nazis particularly manipulating that information, but I've seen photoshopped, like I said, photoshopped newspaper clippings with statistics that have been photoshopped about the Holocaust. And that circulates very quickly within the neo-Nazi circles on Telegram, Signal, and things like that as well. So it's about what we're putting out there to protect the facts. And essentially, I think it's also about what we can do to encourage people to use that information more wisely. So can we train people up? Can we show them the benefits of using that information? We haven't quite hit that yet, but we have young people who are very involved in this, who have the skill set, we can help connect with, who can encourage that, I think. So you're right, it's absolutely a likelihood, but how far it can go, it's hard to predict, and we can't predict it. But we can try and safeguard where we can.
Thank you, Jaya. I've just been told that Dov might be joining us in a second. Dov, do speak up if you're there, because we'd love to hear from you. Oh, excellent.
Can you hear me?
We can, and yes, I think we would love to hear from you, Dov. We are running shortish on time, but if you would like to speak for a few minutes, I'll just briefly introduce Dov to, I think most people will have heard of Dov, but Dov is the co-author of Lily's Promise, which is a Sunday Times and New York Times bestseller, and I think probably anyone who's read the bios will have been bowled over by the sheer number of followers that Dov has online, which is quite mind-boggling. So over to you, Dov. We'd love to hear from you if you're still there, which I hope you are. I see. This is a very short visit, yes. Well, it's nice of you to have dropped in, Dov. I see. So just so everyone knows, Dov is on March of the Living and is, I'm sure, doing his absolute darndest. Oh, he's on his way back from March of the Living. I'm sure he's doing his absolute darndest to join us and contribute. Hopefully, we'll be able to make that happen. I did just want to make one more point to the question about neo-Nazis. First of all, this is sadly happening. And quite a lot. And I don't know as much as someone like Joe Mulhall from Hope Not Hate, who do great work trying to counter this kind of distortion online. The one thing I would observe from my own experience is this is not new. I remember 10 years ago when I joined the Wiener Holocaust Library, I became acquainted for the first time with what was then, it looks very old-fashioned, and even did at the time, a website called Stormfront, which is a neo-Nazi website, I think still exists, but they made a post after, about an exhibition we ran on Nazi propaganda for children about one of the most shocking items in the library's collection, an anti-Semitic game called Jews Out. And most of the responses from these neo-Nazis after posting this game were sort of were mocking and disgusting, but there was also a sort of manipulation of a photo of it and an attempt on one of the people who posted it to claim that the game was false. And one of the things that we did in response back then was to ensure that information about the game, including the contemporary evidence from an SS journal that this was a real game, was posted, loud and clear on our website. So the sad fact is that this activity is out there. There are some things you can do to counter it, and we absolutely have to do that. It's been around for a long time, sadly. Question here at the front?
Yeah, this particularly feeds on something Jaya said, but it kind of applies particularly in relation to what you said just now. You said about we need to depoliticize testimony. I'm not actually sure we do, and I'm not even sure that's possible. Do we perhaps need to get more aggressive about the fact that there is a political impact and accept that, yes, we do have a message and that testimony backs that? I mean, yeah, that's my question, and I'm curious as to what everyone thinks about it.
I'd actually love to hear from Kate and Rachel on this point, because, of course, the kind of work you're doing is trying so hard to be scholarly and objective, but, of course, none of us can act outside the world of politics. So interesting to hear from you both on this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it is possible to depoliticize it, because obviously when we are working in this area, we are trying to make sure that people understand how these things happen so that they don't happen again. So like inherently there is a message that we are trying to portray. So it's about trying to be good custodians really of that testimony, to make sure that we are clear in what we're saying, and that we do have to be careful to try and keep as much objectivity as possible as historians, as scholars, but also not take out, the emotion and the power of the message by sort of over objectifying it type thing. So I mean, it's an incredibly powerful tool, because I mean, certainly as a historian, much of what I do is draw comparisons between what happened then and what's happening now, in order to try and say, these things that are going on in modern times, they've been going on before, but why don't we try and actually learn from that and say it starts with very little. And if you ignore it when it starts with very little in terms of words, in terms of the way people are portrayed, then you are going down a very dangerous road. And I think that we have that responsibility. I don't think that we have any choice in that matter. That is what, if we're working in this field, this is what we need to be very aware of, and we need to be doing, making sure that people don't just see it as an isolated event in history that could never happen again.
Yeah, I would just echo pretty much what Rachel said there, but I think in terms of Vicky and I's work, we've got a lot of different voices, and when we talk about depoliticising, it means different things to different people, and people are on the call that are aware of nuances that perhaps scholars in the UK aren't aware of, even down to rules about hyperlinking out on websites or copyrights or national narratives. And I think to some extent we're learning a lot even just from that process of being online. And it's not to say we lean into them, but I don't know that we're also trying to be so objective to ignore them. And I think that is part of our recommendations, to be also having subgroups, so people are talking to other people in their local area, in their local museums, and then they feed that back into a wider forum. So it's actually we're becoming more aware of these things actually as we have that kind of cross-sector and cross-disciplinary conversations. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Question from there? Yes.
Oh, sorry. Hi. Hello. Yeah. I wanted to ask you a question about consent, or informed consent of the interviewees, because as oral historians, we all get release forms and people sign the consent form. But when it comes to digital media, do our interviewees, some of them are not alive anymore, do they understand exactly what it means? And I wonder what your thoughts are. And this is certainly something, I'm grappling with. For example, just the idea that you're using images here on our program, do we need an explicit consent? And if we don't have it, what do we do about it?
Well, I feel like, Jaya, that was a trick question because we were on the call together and we did have those conversations. And I think that was one of the places where we actually had not disagreements, but we did have a debate. Some colleagues, obviously we don't identify who agrees with what in these reports, some colleagues really felt quite strongly that if the survivor hasn't given consent, you don't use it at all. Other people felt like consent should then be passed down to their children if they're the people that are trying to remix and reuse this testimony. One of the immediate recommendations was, again, looking at consent, but also within different contexts and different kind of, boundaries and borders. But yeah, I don't really have the answer to it right now, but it was obviously something that was so prevalent in our discussions online, so.
I think this is, as you know, Jaya, it's one of the big debates that continues, and this is with many areas. I mean, I was just having a conversation with several different people here about how they were using material, and then one member of the family would want it used, another member of the family would not want it used. Like, where do you draw the line in terms of that? With some of the material that we have, that we use from some of the different archives and collections that we communicate with, in some cases they sort of take it as deemed consent, that if you're using it as part of Holocaust education, because the person has undertaken an interview in order to educate people about the Holocaust, therefore you assume that they wouldn't mind. But it does also often come down to a case-by-case basis. I mean, for example, in the book the latest book on internment I have coming out later on this year, I wanted to use some photographs, photographs, drawings that had been made of an internment camp. And I contacted the family and they said, well, we want to know in what context you're doing it. Does the history you're telling chime with what we were told by our grandfather about his experiences, or have you got an agenda? So I was like, here's the material, and they said, well, that's fine, you can use it. So I do think it's very difficult to make a complete generalization, but in some areas where you know that the material has been given for educational purposes, so long as you are not abusing that, then I think it's...
Yeah, I did just want to develop that point a little bit, perhaps coming back to Jaya, in that it raises the fascinating question of who has not only the right, but also the power to say, no, this use or this remixing or whatever of testimony is unacceptable. And of course, in the era of the witness, the obvious person who would have the authority to say that was the witness themselves, but it becomes more complicated, especially if platforms are behaving irresponsibly. Now, we're of course representing and promoting responsible platforms, but the work of the Holocaust Educational Trust, for example, has tried often to hold platforms to account, but it's so difficult. I don't know if that's something that you've come across as well in your experience, Jaya.
Yeah, so I think I feel like it ties into what I mentioned actually about the politicization, so I think the essence of that point is that, in my personal view, it's the Holocaust survivors' prerogative whether they want to use their testimony to speak out about current issues or political issues, right? So you have Holocaust survivors who won't, and you have Holocaust survivors who do. And so the question is, when their testimony is out there on social media, or when it's out there in the digital age, how do we know which survivors, when they're no longer here, want their testimony to be used to talk about certain political issues, or want their testimony to not be used to talk about certain political issues? And that's up to them to decide, but it's very difficult when they're not with us to know, right? And I think that builds into the point about holding platforms to account. It's always an assumption. Everything we're doing is based on an assumption. So I think where we can encourage that, to have that consensus or to have that conversation with survivors and include the people closest to them, their family and their closest friends, I think while we have that privilege, we should be trying to do it. It doesn't mean we'll have the answers to everything, but it means that at least we know where our intentions lie, and we're trying to work along with what a survivor would have wanted, if we can assume that, but it's difficult because we can't. So that's what I feel touches in with the politicization, and it works both ways. It works with the far right, it works with the far left, it works with our politicians. In any which way, when anybody uses survivor testimony to make a point or to prove a point about something that is political, because I think ultimately everything is political, where do we draw that line? And where do we say that that wasn't what they wanted, or that was what they wanted? So I think it's just a balancing act, and just trying to ascertain, while we can, from survivors, what they feel and how they feel about their testimony being used.
That wasn't quite the time-up signal, but we're coming towards it. But we do have a question here from the lady. I don't know if we could get the microphone to this lady who wanted to ask a question. Thank you.
If a recording of my talk is out there in the digital space, how would I be even aware if it has been misused or manipulated as a little person sitting in my home office? Yes. Would I be aware of that?
That's a very good question. And it may be even it's slightly a lateral thought, but it brings me to the question of how artificial intelligence will change things. Because on the one hand, it makes things so much more difficult because of things like deepfakes, as the risk that's already been highlighted. But you could also imagine alerts for misuses being identified using artificial intelligence at this huge scale. So I don't know, it's all slightly mind-boggling, especially for people who aren't especially technical like me. Probably we've got panelists who understand this all a little bit better. But yes, what reassurances can anyone have if they've given a testimony that it will be used responsibly?
Well, these are some of the problems that are being... These are questions that we're asking in sort of all of our events, and how do you deal with that? I was at an event a few weeks ago, and somebody was saying, the problem is that whatever we do, we can never guarantee that somebody won't somewhere, somehow, manipulate something into saying something you don't want it to do. And can we allow that to stop us from sharing? If we're so afraid that that might happen, would that actually have a negative effect on how we share material? And somebody was saying yesterday that perhaps what we need to think about is how can we get the information out there so much that people can instantly see something and go, that definitely can't be right. And I think that is something that is more within our power than the ability to stop people from manipulating images and data.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to add to that as well. I think if we look more widely at this idea that I was trying to suggest about the visibility of the interface, or Amit Pinchevsky will refer to it as a kind of framelessness, drawing attention to the kind of artificiality of what we're using when we engage with these things in the first place can, I think, kind of take some of this power away. So, yeah, I just think we're talking about it in terms of being much more self-reflexive. When we had it today, someone was saying behind the scenes we were being shown how the exhibition was put together. We're being shown how a TikTok was also put together rather than just watching the content of the TikTok itself. That kind of behind-the-scenes glimpse, I think, can sometimes take the power out of what we're so scared of, which is this really convincing thing that we've all got on our phones and, on our personal devices. So I think actually if we just start to realize that we're engaging with these devices in those ways, and I think it's sort of been hinted at that not all of this is brand new, right? So we're talking about the digital age like it's this brand new thing, but, we can see a lot of things being carried over from analog, the ways we can see games from films and things like that. So I think we should be careful not to be always so hesitant and talk about the digital as this brand new thing, and actually, look back and see where we've come from to understand it a bit more. Again, media archaeology approach, so just advocating for that.
So yeah, I think it's about how much information we can put out there to counter that, how much of a solid education we can give to people so that they have the ability to counter it and fight against it, because we can't control all of the information that's out there. And I think that's why when we're thinking about the future of testimony, I try to encourage us not to think so much about just the digital age. Where can we use Holocaust, sites of the Holocaust and the Holocaust landscape to keep testimony and education going, and where can we encourage that? And the more we do that and connect the two, I think the better it will be, rather than us completely relying on the internet and the digital age to share that testimony. I think it's going to be a combination, and if we can strike that balance, I think we can fight things like deep fakes and edited Photoshop documents a lot better.
We're out of time for questions, I'm afraid, but I just wanted to finish with one reflection, which is perhaps the thought that we almost have a duty to live in uncertainty and still work towards the good and the true anyway. And it reminds me a little bit, just as a last reflection, of one of the things that's moved me most about working at the library and showing people things in the library's archives. I often show people the bulletins from Dr. Wiener, who was warning people about what the Nazis were doing. And one of the things I show is an early report of the beginning of mass killings at Auschwitz, which Wiener was disseminating in 1942, not long after the Wannsee Conference. And one of the things that I find very moving about this bulletin is each entry of information on the bulletin is very carefully referenced where the source of information is from. Credible information is made credible the same way that it was made credible even then, back in the 1940s. And we still have that power that we are on the side of what is true, and the force of truth is still with evidence, with credible sources of information. And we have to take some encouragement from that. We've heard a lot of passionate contributions from our panel today and from other speakers. And it really, you feel it in this room that we have a task to do. It's important, and we all have to work towards it together. So I'd just like to invite you all to join me in thanking our excellent panel. I believe it's now my privilege to hand over to the chair of the Association of Jewish Refugees, Mike Cupp.
Well, I have to start by congratulating everyone on their fortitude to be still to be here after 2 days. And what a fantastic 2 days we've had. We're delighted. As EHRI, we've had over 200 participants from across the UK and worldwide. So impressed to have your personal support and the support of your organisations. We value our role at EHRI as convener, so we're delighted that this event's worked out so well. As I mentioned last night, those that were at the embassy will have heard me say, and echoed by Lord Pickles, absolutely delighted to see the full and open exchange of views. The content has been outstanding, and so thank you for that. Yeah, we had a really important announcement about the portal, a massive opportunity to develop a resource for sharing testimony, making it available to people, and with everyone who's participating and everyone who can participate, developing it to be a truly valuable resource and bring others in as well. And we've got a huge number of things to think about. As we keep saying, as we move from living memory, it's essential we continue to ask ourselves the difficult questions, explore different approaches, share views, and leverage the lessons learned. And as we've just been discussing, as we get more digital, with so much disinformation and distortion, we do need to work together to meet fire with fire. At the heart of it, we know the impact of stories. I love the notion from Sydney of reverberation. That was a word I wrote down. I thought that was very good. At some point, it'll give me an excuse to go back to visit the museum in Sydney again, of course, which it'll be a good thing. Now, for foreign visitors, I'm English, so you expect me to speak in riddles and not to say things clearly. So I'm just going to say a few things very, very clearly. It is fantastic that so many good things are going on. Thoughtfulness, innovation, creativity. As I said earlier, it's wonderful that so many of you have taken time from your busy schedules to be here for these last 2 days. It's clear that lots of people have learned lots. However, we will have failed if we don't go away with a real commitment to a step change in collaboration. It's not as if it's not as if we have conflicting objectives. We all want the same outcomes. There's too much to do. It can't be done if everyone is in their own silos. I thought Rob Williams' words this afternoon were challenging and a clear call to arms. We need to educate more kids, as Alex pointed out this morning. We need to educate more adults, as Rob highlighted very, very clearly. And including more effectively second, third, fourth generation stories, people who want to help, is really, really important. And again, as Rob said, we need to work together to raise the ships together. And I'll be blunt, in relation to fundraising, in relation to influencing government and other authorities who will help us do what we do. And actually, as we all explore the difficult digital landscape, if we do it separately and singly, we will fail. If we collaborate, the impact we will have will be so much greater. So we need to be organized and efficient. And I'll say this, I have been struck by how good everyone here is at getting things done. It's remarkable, the stories we've heard from the start yesterday to the finish today, the stuff that people have been presenting, everyone's been presenting, it's been so impressive getting things done, not just talking about stuff, but getting things done. So my plea, my encouragement, let's get things done together because we will accomplish so much more when we do that. In summary, the conversations of the last 2 days need to be the start, not the end of the conversations. And as convener, we'll be more than happy to convene further conversations. So that's really my key message. Finally, I'd like to pay a bunch of thanks to many, many people. Firstly, to our partners, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, the German Embassy, Lord Pickles and Sally Seeley from the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. The support of all of those has been fantastic, and we wouldn't have been able to do this without them. So a sincere thanks to you all. To the AJR team, to Jaya, to Susan, to all our staff members who've worked so hard to make this such a smooth and well-run endeavour. It's been great, and I just can't say thank you enough. It's been great. To Alex, our Director of Education and Heritage, to Michael Newman, our CEO. I've said about Michael before, he's really a frustrated impresario. He loves putting on events, and I'm sure you'll agree, we've had a heck of a show for the last 2 days. So I'm sure you and all the rest of the AJR team will be sleeping well tonight. And last, and definitely not least, thank you to all of you, our speakers and our participants, for being here, for giving everything, for being present. It's been fantastic. It's never easy to take time out from busy schedules, but you've done that, and so we really appreciate your commitment and your contributions. But as I say, please don't walk out of here to go back to what you were doing before. Think of some tangible changes that you can make to help the collaboration that I've been talking about. Oh, and for those of you my age, you'll remember Colombo? Just one more thing. Just one more thing. You're all free to join the AJR. You know, if you want to be members, we'd be delighted to have you. So that's it. You may recall from yesterday, we have to be out of here promptly. Those of you who watch Sky Sports, you know, the sprinkler's going to turn on in a minute. I don't want to get wet. So safe journeys home, and hopefully we'll all meet again. Thank you very much.